Chilling tales for dark nights.
Fear of Hugh. Written by Nicola Torch. Performed by Daniel Radcliffe. Audio production and music by Jeff Clement.
I knew something was stirring, but I didn't want to know what. I knew something was watching me, but I didn't want to watch back. I opened my eyes, wondering what I would see, hoping I wouldn't feel her presence there, stood, head bowed with her piercing, menacing eyes. However, I was again disheartened by the fact that she was there. She was here. I knew she was. She has been with me for so long that how could I forget her? As my eyelids shifted begrudgingly, a chill darted across my body like a firework in midwinter. My heart skipped a few beats and I knew that she would be aware of it, especially in the dark. Ghosts use the night as their playground. They can dance on their dwelling without a care in the world. They feed off fear, and they use that fear as a drug, which propels them into a state far worse than even their worst nightmares. My eyes were open wide now, and fixed on the girl who had haunted my slumber for so long, and who was stood by my bedside looking. Just looking. I gulped, and her expression changed. She was coming for me. I knew it. She got closer and closer, until I could feel her icy breath whip across my cheek, and her vile stench of death bleach my senses. I collapsed under her grip, which was too tight to escape from. I felt my lungs compressed, my ribs snapped like a twig. But then, out of nowhere, light bathed the room in colors I was familiar with. I twisted my head to the source of my previous pain and she had vanished. She hated the light. In the light, nothing can hurt you. But in the dark, it is a completely different place, a place where even the strongest of people are most vulnerable. That is why she comes and goes. I know that in the dark, she can sense my terror. She hunts it down like a cat toying with her prey. The light is her only weakness. When a blanket of light erupts from the gap in my dusty curtains, I know that she has fled, until again the night comes, and she will be the stronger party and I the weaker once more. It's like a game of hide and seek, only you are being both sought and hidden.
August Heat, written by W.F. Harvey. Narrated by Patrick Rothfuss for Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Fenistone Road, Clapham. August 20th, 1906. I have had what I believe to be the most remarkable day in my life, and while events are still fresh in my mind, I wish to put them down on paper as clearly as possible. Let me say at the outset that my name is James Clarence Withencroft. I am 40 years old, in perfect health, never having known a day's illness. By profession I am an artist, not a very successful one, but I earn enough money from my black and white work to satisfy my necessary wants. My only near relative, a sister, died 5 years ago, so that I am independent. I breakfasted this morning at 9, and after glancing through the morning paper, I lighted my pipe and proceeded to let my mind wander in the hope that I might chance upon some subject for my pencil. The room, though the door and windows were open, was oppressively hot, and I had just made up my mind that the coolest and most comfortable place in the neighborhood would be the deep end of the public swimming bath, when the idea came. I began to draw. So intent was I on my work that I left my lunch untouched, only stopping work when the clock of St. Jude's struck 4. The final result for a hurried sketch was, I felt sure, the best thing that I have done. It showed a criminal in the dock, immediately after the judge had pronounced sentence. The man was fat, enormously fat. The flesh hung in rolls about his chin. It creased his huge, stumpy neck. He was clean-shaven. Perhaps I should say a few days before he must have been clean-shaven, and almost bald. He stood in the dock, his short, stumpy fingers clasping the rail, looking straight in front of him. The feeling that his expression conveyed was not so much one of horror as of utter, absolute collapse. There seemed nothing in the man strong enough to sustain that mountain of flesh. I rolled up the sketch, and without quite knowing why, placed it in my pocket. Then, with the rare sense of happiness which the knowledge of a good thing well done gives, I left the house. I believe that I set out with the idea of calling upon Trenton, for I remember walking down Lytton Street and turning to the right along Gilchrist Road, at the bottom of the hill where the men were at work on the new tram lines. From there onward, I have only the vaguest recollections of where I went. The one thing of which I was fully conscious was the awful heat that came up from the dusty asphalt pavement in an almost palpable wave. I longed for the thunder promised by the great banks of copper-colored cloud that hung low over the western sky. I must have walked 5 or 6 miles when a small boy roused me from my reverie by asking the time.
Hey, mister, what time is it?
It was 20 minutes to 7. When he left me, I began to take stock of my bearings. I found myself standing before a gate that led into a yard bordered by a strip of thirsty earth, where there were flowers, purple stock and scarlet geranium, and above the entrance was a board with the inscription, Chas Atkinson, Monumental Mason, Worker in English and Italian Marbles. From the yard itself came a cheery whistle, the noise of hammer blows, and the cold sound of steel meeting stone. A sudden impulse made me enter, and a man sitting with his back towards me, busy at work on a slab of curiously veined marble, turned round as he heard my steps and stopped short. It was the man I had been drawing, whose portrait lay in my pocket. He sat there, huge and elephantine, the sweat pouring from his scalp, and he wiped at it with a red silk handkerchief. But though the face was the same, the expression was absolutely different. He greeted me smiling, as if we were old friends, and shook my hand. I apologized for the intrusion. "Everything is hot and glary outside," I said. "This seems an oasis in the wilderness."
I don't know about the oasis, but it certainly is hot. It's hot as hell. Take a seat, sir.
He pointed to the end of the gravestone on which he was at work, and I sat down. "That's a beautiful piece of stone you've got hold of," I said. He shook his head.
Nah, in a way it is. The surface here is as fine as anything you could wish, but there's a big flaw at the back, though I don't expect you'd ever notice it. I could never make really a good job of a bit of marble like that. It'd be all right in a summer like this. It wouldn't mind the blasted heat. But wait till winter comes. There's nothing quite like the frost to find out the weak points in stone.
"Then what's it for?" I asked. The man burst out laughing.
You'd hardly believe me if I was to tell you it's for an exhibition. But it's the truth. Artists have exhibitions. So do grocers and butchers. We have them too. All the latest things in the headstones, you know.
He went on to talk of marbles, which sort best withstood wind and rain, which were the easiest to work with, then of his garden, and of a new sort of carnation he had bought. At the end of every other minute he would stop and drop his tools and wipe his shining head and curse the heat. I said little, for I felt uneasy. There was something unnatural, uncanny in meeting this man. I tried at first to persuade myself that I had seen him before, that his face, unknown to me, had found a place in some out-of-the-way corner of my memory. But I knew that I was practicing little more than a plausible piece of self-deception. Mr. Atkinson finished his work, spat on the ground, and got up with a sigh of relief.
There. What do you think of that?
He said, with an air of evident pride. The inscription which I read for the first time was this: sacred to the memory of James Clarence Withencroft. Born January 18th, 1860, he passed away very suddenly on August 20th, 1906. In the midst of life, we are in death. For some time I sat in silence. Then a cold shudder ran down my spine. I asked him where he had seen the name.
Oh, I didn't see it anywhere. I wanted some name, and I put down the first thing that came into my head. Why do you want to know?
Well, it is a strange coincidence, but it happens to be mine. He gave a long, low whistle.
And the dates?
I can only answer for one of them, and that is correct.
It's a rum go.
But he knew less than I did. I told him of my morning's work. I took the sketch from my pocket and showed it to him. As he looked, the expression of his face altered until it became more and more like that of the man that I had drawn.
And it was only day before yesterday that I told Maria there were no such thing as ghosts.
Neither of us had seen a ghost, but I knew exactly what he meant. You probably heard my name, I said. And you must have seen me somewhere and forgotten it. Were you at Clacton-on-Sea last July?
I have never been to Clacton in my life.
We were silent for some time. We were both looking at the same thing, the two dates on the gravestone, and one of them was right.
Come inside and have some supper,
said Mr. Atkinson. His wife was a cheerful little woman, with the flaky red cheeks of the country bred. Her husband introduced me as a friend of his, who was an artist. The result was unfortunate, for after the sardines and watercress had been removed, she brought me out a Doré Bible, and I had to sit and express my admiration for nearly half an hour. I went outside and found Atkinson sitting on the gravestone, smoking. We resumed the conversation at the point we had left off. You must excuse my asking, I said, but do you know of anything you've done for which you could be put on trial? He shook his head.
I'm not a bankrupt. The business is prosperous enough. 3 years ago I gave turkeys to some of the guardians at Christmas, but that's all I can think of. And they were small ones, too.
He got up, fetched a can from the porch, and began to water the flowers.
Twice a day, regular in the hot weather,
he said.
And then the heat sometimes gets the better of the delicate ones. Then ferns, good Lord, they could never stand it. Where do you live?
I told him my address. It would take an hour's quick walk to get back home.
It's like this. Well, you can look at the matter straight. If you go back home tonight, you take your chances of accidents. A cart may run you over, and there's always banana skins and orange peels, to say nothing of falling lettuce.
He spoke of the improbable with an intense seriousness that would have been laughable 6 hours ago, but I did not laugh.
The best thing we can do,
he continued,
is for you to stay here till 12 o'clock. We'll go upstairs and smoke. It may be cooler inside.
And, to my surprise, I agreed. We are sitting in a long, low room beneath the eaves. Atkinson has sent his wife to bed. He himself is busy sharpening some tools at a little oil stone, smoking one of my cigars all the while. The air seems charged with thunder. I am writing this at a shaky table before the open window. The leg is cracked, and Atkinson, who seems a handy man with his tools, is going to mend it as soon as he has finished putting an edge on his chisel. It is after 11 now. I shall be gone in less than an hour. But the heat is stifling. It is enough to send a man mad.
The Scarecrow Corpse by Kris Mallory. narrated by Markiplier. The following testimony was emailed to me recently by an old friend. I haven't heard back from him. I hope he's okay. As you know, I'm in, or was in, training to be a coroner. My education was almost complete, and I had been working a paid internship with a well-known medical examiner in the Washington, D.C. area. All that changed a few hours ago when I was fired from the office for refusing to participate in what I believe to be a cover-up, even though they warned me about consequences for leaking any information about this case. My conscience wouldn't be clear if I kept quiet. This is something people need to know. A few days ago, we received a call from the Metro Police about a possible body discovered on the Red Line. Since working here, we've responded to a few calls in the subway system. The first time, it was a woman who tripped over someone's rolling suitcase while trying to pass by on the escalators. She ended up with a broken neck. Twice we went out there for a heart attack, once for a late-night mugging that went bad. The poor guy was stabbed repeatedly in the stomach, even though he handed over his watch and wallet like the mugger requested. So far, I haven't seen anything especially gory, and it was a bit of a letdown when the dispatch officer said the man was found just sitting on the train. Is it wrong that I've been looking forward to a call about someone either jumping or being pushed in front of a train? The interesting thing is the wording of the dispatch request. Possible body. If the word possible is in front of body, maybe it's the paramedics that should be responding and not the coroner's office. When we arrived, the paramedics actually were on the scene, so we figured it was just a miscommunication and we were called out prematurely. Police tape blocked off the entire station platform. From our view at the top of the escalators, we could tell something wasn't right. The paramedics stood outside the door to the train car and they weren't actually doing anything except arguing and pointing at a body slumped up against a window inside. We could have left, but since it was a slow evening, we decided to take a look anyway just to see what was going on. As we approached, I overheard some of the conversation between the two paramedics. "He's dead, right?" said the older of the two. "Dead people don't do that." "Do what?" I thought. Once they saw us, they quickly agreed that the man was dead and promptly left the scene to us. Clearly, this wasn't a call they wanted to handle. I can understand that. The police weren't much help either. I chatted with the officers on the scene while the doc went in to take a look at the man on the train. One of the detectives commented that there weren't any clear signs of foul play. The witnesses all claimed that the guy just sat down like everyone else and then he stopped breathing. Natural causes, I thought. Seemed like a pretty cut and dry case, but when I looked over my shoulder at the doc, he seemed confused. "Look at this," he said to me as I walked into the train. As I approached, it seemed like the man was just napping, like a lot of train riders do when they know their stop won't be coming up for a while. "Look at what?" I asked. "His eyes." The man's head was forward, with his chin to his chest, so that I had to kneel down to get a good look at his face. As I'm doing this, the doc is talking out loud like he tends to do, just going over his mental checklist. "Not breathing, no pulse, his skin is cold to the touch, approximate time of death, 6 to 8 hours ago." I'm in the aisle of the train, trying to make do with a pin flashlight since the dim lighting on the train wasn't helping things much. The man's eyes were open, and they seemed to be staring at me. It's not uncommon, so I lean in closer hoping to figure out what it is the doc wanted me to see so that I don't look like an idiot. And then he blinked. I jumped back as quick as a mongoose would jump away from a cobra. "What the fuck?" I tried to say. "Exactly," the doc said. "Gotta be a muscle spasm, right?" "You would think," he says. But watch this. He grabs the guy by the hair and pulls his head back. With his other hand, he waves a finger in front of the man's open eyes, which then began to follow along as the doc moves his finger left and right. Then the man looked at me and blinked again. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" I ask. "Nope." "And he's dead?" "As a doornail." We let the officer in charge know that we couldn't determine the cause of death on site. A full autopsy would need to be performed to make any kind of determination. She made a note in the report that this body had a tendency to follow you with its eyes and occasionally blink. Off the record, she told me the whole case bothered her. The man, she said, didn't have any identification. Credit cards, watch, jewelry, a phone, or even money. All they found on him was a train ticket and a napkin. Once we had him back at the office, we changed into our examination coveralls. I was asked to deal with his clothing. The man watched me the whole time as I stripped off his business suit. He even winked at me once. Also, a few odd things were noted about the clothing. First, he wasn't wearing any undergarments. Normally people wear a t-shirt, boxers, a brief, and socks. This guy wore none of those things, but for some reason, he had on 2 belts, one over the other. The doc switched on his tape recorder and then turned on the buzzsaw. I watched as he performed the Y incision, and I made a mental note of his perfect technique so that I could try and do it better next time. I'm telling you, the doc is a real artist. Next came the enjoyable cracking sound as the ribcage was pried open. While this was happening, the man's eyes watched us. I could almost swear he was smiling too. Over the next hour, the doc made notes as he did the exam. He handed me each organ to be weighed and cataloged. There was nothing strange or out of the ordinary about any of the internal organs. "Okay," the doc said. "Let's take a look inside his head. I want to see what's causing the eye movement." "Listen, do you mind if we tape the eyes shut first?" I tried to remain as professional as I could, but the constant blinking unnerved me. The doc didn't mind, so I took some suture tape and worked up the courage to manually close the guy's eyelids and tape them down. Immediately, they started moving fast. His whole face was convulsing and contorting itself, trying to break free of the tape. "I don't think he likes that," the doc said, and then he removed the tape from the man's eyes. The violent motion stopped right away, and the man winked at the doc. "This isn't natural," I said. "There's a scientific reason for everything. It's our job to find it," the doc replied. "But he actually fought to get the tape off his eyes." "I guess he wants to watch. Now, do you want to remove the skull, or should I?" I'm too shaken to handle the equipment, so I watch as the doc works the saw around the man's skull. The bastard is smiling. I'm sure of it. He's staring at me and blinking his left eye and then his right eye back and forth. I hear the familiar popping sound caused by the top of a skull being pulled off. "Whoa. Okay," the doctor says. "What is it?" I ask as I'm walking around to see what he's seeing. The man's eyes follow me, of course. "I think I might have to call this one in." Dear God. The brain was missing. "Doc?" I ask. "Not now. Pack up and go home. I'll finish cleaning this up." He's saying this as he's already dialing a number on the phone. "But just go. I'll call you later." It isn't a request. I know when to shut up and listen. I make my way to the door knowing that the man is still staring at me. "And don't say anything to anyone." The doc never called me back. Each time I tried to reach him, it went to voicemail. I tried to go back the next day. Security won't let me in the building. They said I was to await further instructions while on paid leave. That was 4 days ago. This morning I hear a knock at my door. It's a man who said he was with the medical examiner's office, but he looks as if he's with the CIA, FBI, NSA, or some other 3-letter agency. He asks if he can come in to talk. I open the door to let him in, and as I do, I notice 2 other similarly dressed men sitting in a black Suburban across the street. The folder he hands me is a case file for the John Doe that was found on the train. All of the notes about the eye movement and the blinking were removed. There was no mention of anything out of the ordinary, let alone a missing brain. It's already got the doc's signature on it, and this man is asking for me to sign it as well. I try to tell him the file is wrong, but he holds up a hand to stop me from speaking. "This is how it happened. Sign it," he said. I ask about the doc. I want to know why I haven't heard from him. He says the doc has been let go. The way he says it makes me think the worst. I refuse to sign it and ask to speak to the director of the medical examiner's office. The man informs me that would be impossible and that I am to be fired. But fired isn't the word he used. The word he used was terminated. He leaves when I ask him to go, but he warns me that mentioning this to anyone would have serious consequences. As soon as the door closed behind him, I packed a bag and took off. I saw that a black Suburban was parked at the end of my street, and I might just be paranoid, but I think it pulled out after I did. Just in case I was being followed, I changed directions several times. When I felt it was safe enough, I pulled into a nearby residential neighborhood and found an open Wi-Fi signal. I think something strange is going on in DC, maybe elsewhere as well. I don't know what it could be, but I feel like the doc and I stumbled onto something we weren't supposed to know about, and now we're in danger. I found the doc's home number online. When I called, it went straight to voicemail. I tried to leave a message for him, but the line went dead once I began talking. If someone is monitoring my phone calls, it's possible my car is bugged too, and they already know exactly where I am. Again, maybe I'm just paranoid or crazy. Maybe there is a completely logical explanation for the Scarecrow Corpse that stares and blinks and winks and smiles. I can't imagine how anything like that could exist or why. I'm scared. Really, really scared. I decided the only thing to do would be to write this and email it out to everyone I know. Hopefully this information will make it to someone. If you've received this and haven't heard back from me by tomorrow, then I'm probably dead, and you'll know what I've written is true.
Mr. Leaves. Written by Michael Whitehouse. Narrated by Tay Zonday for Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.
Mr. Leaves was here.
Those were the first words out of my daughter's mouth that morning. I dismissed the chatter as normal for a 7-year-old girl. It didn't seem strange to me that she would develop a new imaginary friend, especially under the circumstances. Change can do that to a kid, forcing them to create something to hold on to, making the world seem more secure. We had decided to move away from the city to find somewhere a little less hectic, somewhere we could call home. As a doctor, I had to wait until an opportunity arose and was delighted when an opening appeared in the sleepy town of Windarm. It was a quiet place filled with pristine cottages, sun-baked streets, and lush hedgerows. Not too big, not too small. Perfect for the three of us. My wife, Erin, and I had named our daughter Karen, after an aunt, but we always called her Kip instead. It was an old English word my grandfather used when he was going to sleep. Karen loved to sleep more than most, and so Kip seemed to suit her just fine. Our new home on the outskirts of Windarm town was older than we were used to, a converted farmhouse dating back 150 years or so. With a little bit of land thrown into the deal for good measure, we fell in love with the place immediately. When we first pulled up outside, Kip rushed up the rickety white stairs, through the wide double doors, and disappeared into the embrace of her new home. She was ecstatic, roaming around the confines of the spaces inside. It was an adventure for her, even at such a fragile age. She understood the importance of the stories old places could tell. She didn't mind the dust, the shaky banisters, or the creaking floorboards. Within 10 minutes, each of the 3 floors had been explored by her little 7-year-old feet. Of course, there were sure to be nooks and crannies not yet seen in the attic and cellar, but Kip was not interested in those places for now. She was only interested in her new room. I had naively told her she could choose any room in the house, and of course she did. The best one in the house. Erin and I smiled at each other, watching happily as Kip darted around her new room excitedly. She loved the high ceilings because it felt grand and imposing, like being a princess in a castle. She found the groans and squeaks that the floorboards made under her feet hilarious, pressing up and down on the loudest ones while giggling. Most of all, she loved the window. It was wide and sprawling. The farmland bobbed and weaved over flats and small hills below. An old oak tree towered alongside a vacant barn nearby. The summer sky bleached the world in blues, whites, and yellows, and yet it was something much closer that fascinated my daughter. A thick web of ivy roots had thrust out of the soil decades earlier, climbing a carefully constructed wooden frame attached to the house, which rose as high as the roof. The ivy had clawed and fingered its way across the wooden slats of the farmhouse, almost entirely covering that side of the building. The surrounding land was in full bloom, everything vibrant and green. The fields were swathed in tall crops which poked out of the soil like a million city dwellers standing still in the sun. Everything was alive and vivid. That was, except for the climbing ivy. Its vines were spindly, yet clung to the wooden frame of the house with deceptive strength. A vast sea of leaves, brown and withered, reached up across the wooden wall, encircling Kip's window. There was something troubling about those vines, clashing against, almost strangling the possibilities of summer. Kip didn't mind. In fact, she was enamored by them, having me open the window so she could caress the golden leaves which touched the sill. The first night in the house was like any spent in a new place, unfamiliar creaks and sounds echoing out through the darkness. I am often a deep sleeper, but the uncertainty of the old house left me checking every bump and movement I heard throughout the night. I switched the lights on, checked the doors, and then looked in on Kip. She slept soundly, but I noticed that the window was still open, letting in the cool night's breeze. I tried to shut it, but it felt jammed or stuck, the old flaking paint and grime freezing it into position after years of little use. I told myself I'd fix it in the morning. After all, Kip was 2 floors up, and we were a decent distance from any other house. I felt she'd be quite safe with the window open. Kip loved to lie in, and as it was Saturday and our first full day in our new home, I let her sleep until 10 in the morning. When I entered her room with a bowl of cereal and glass of orange juice, I noticed how cold that big old room could get, even in the summer. She lay on her bed, still asleep. I gently woke her, and it was then that she spoke those bewildering words.
Mr. Leaves was here.
She seemed frightened, so we talked about it.
He scares me, Daddy,
she offered, but didn't want to say any more. I comforted her, saying it was probably just a bad dream and that moving to a new place can be pretty scary by itself. But she still seemed uneasy. It was obvious to me that she was speaking about an imaginary friend, but the conversation disturbed me enough that I talked it over with my wife, worried that our daughter might not be adjusting well to the move. It's hard to leave your friends and school behind. That day, more of our things from the old home arrived. Slowly, the house began to feel like ours, and I enjoyed wandering around it, taking in the glorious view of the crops, fields. In the late afternoon, I went up to Kip's room with my toolbox, determined to close the window to stop her from catching a summer cold. As I chipped away at the dirt and flaked paint that had jammed the window open, I looked down and could see that Kip was playing away from the house, sitting on an old rope swing which hung from the oak tree by the barn. She looked happy. Finally, the window budged, and I was able to close it. On the second night, I didn't sleep well at all, and by the morning I felt shattered. Something had changed to me. The house didn't feel as comfortable as it did when we first arrived. The air had become closer and stifled. Again, I let Kip sleep in for a while before bringing her breakfast. She was already awake when I entered, and when I asked her how she had slept, she replied,
Not good, Daddy.
When I inquired why, she whispered,
Mr. Leaves was watching me from outside.
I looked over at the window for a moment, a chill running up my back.
Can you tell him to go away?
Kip asked. Again, I reassured her and gave her a big hug. Soon she was playing on the swing again by the barn. For most of that day, I tried to get my files in order. I wasn't due at the doctor's office in town for another 2 weeks, but I wanted to be as prepared as possible. Erin took care of some business at the bank while Kip continued to smile and giggle as she always did, running around the house playing games. Most kids get bored during the summer holidays, but she always had a way of engaging with the world, which meant she never had a dull moment. I remember it being just after 2 a.m. It was dark, but something had pulled me from a heavy sleep. Uncertain at first as I opened my eyes to the darkness, I finally realized what it was. Kip was talking. I didn't want to disturb Erin, and I knew it was probably just my daughter talking in her sleep as she had done before. But as I walked barefoot across the creaking floor towards her room, I kept thinking about those words.
Mr. Leaves was watching me.
As quietly as possible, I reached the door and could still hear her talking loudly, her words muffled slightly. I knocked and entered.
Get away from me!
The window was once again open and Kip was leaning out of it, chatting away. On asking her what she was doing, she turned slowly towards me and said,
I'm talking to Mr. Leaves.
I rushed over to the window and saw nothing but the cool summer night and the climbing ivy fluttering slightly at the presence of a sudden breeze.
He keeps looking at me, Daddy,
said Kip as I put her back into bed. I closed the window and slept in an armchair next to her until morning. The following day, the sun absolutely split the sky. It was perfect weather, and I decided that it would be good to get Kip to help me with some chores, hoping that keeping her active would help her sleep more soundly at night. In the morning, we cut and raked the front and back lawns. We then dug out some weeds around a flower bed. Kip and Erin found it hysterical when they soaked me with a hose while watering the plants. Finally, I decided that Kip and I should take a look at the old barn. It had been included in the sale of the house, but hadn't been used for years. I'd only been in it once, when viewing the property months previous, and it was just a quick peek without going inside. It was the house I was really interested in. Kip had been helping her mom wash the car when I took her hand and said, "Fair maiden, are you ready for an adventure?"
Yes,
she replied with delight. Erin smiled approvingly. "Okay, let's go," I yelled. I grabbed her hand and led her round to the side of the house where her window looked out, high above. Picking her up and putting her on my shoulders, she laughed loudly.
Go, Daddy, go!
I ran forwards towards the old barn, but as we passed the oak tree on the way, she suddenly stopped laughing. At first she asked quietly,
Where are we going?
Another few footsteps, and it wasn't long before she burst into tears, shouting and pleading for us to go back to the house. I stopped immediately, shocked by her response, and gave her a big hug as my wife came running.
What's wrong, honey?
Asked Erin. Through tears and a shaking voice, Kip replied,
Daddy was taking me to the barn.
And why did that upset you?
Mr. Leaves! Mr. Leaves!
At that, she continued to sob and cry. Erin comforted her as I marched inside. I was going to put a stop to this nonsense. Grabbing my toolbox, I ran up the stairs and into Kip's room. In a few minutes, the job was done and the window had been nailed shut. There'd be no more talking to Mr. Leaves. After making Kip her favorite supper and letting her stay up a little later than usual to watch a film with us, we both tucked her into her bed back upstairs. She didn't seem upset, and when we brought up the idea of her moving rooms, she swore to us that everything was fine. She really did love that room. Erin read her a story, we kissed her goodnight, and then we went to bed. I woke up to the sound of screaming. No one can underestimate the power of a child's cry for help on a parent. I leapt out of bed and tore across the hallway in the dark, bursting into Kip's room. She lay in the middle of the floor, sobbing in fear. My eyes had yet to adapt to the darkness, but as I instinctively stepped forward to pick my daughter up from the ground, I knew that I was not alone. A sharp pain seared across the back of my head as I fell to the floor, dazed. Kip screamed as she clutched onto me for dear life. The sound of feet came once more, and as I rolled over, I saw my wife, Erin, running through the doorway. I tried to warn her, but the strike to the back of my head had left me both bloodied and sluggish. As any loving mother would, Erin ran to her family's aid. A tall, darkened figure then reached out from behind the door, grabbing my wife's throat with grizzled hands and smashing her head straight into a wall. Her body crumpled to the ground. I staggered to my feet and began swinging my arms as hard as I could at the beast, but in such a daze, the warm trickle of blood running down the back of my neck, it was easy to be outfought. I tried my best. Damn it, I tried. Something smashed against my jaw and my nose, crushing it into my face. I gasped and fell to the ground. Kip held on to me once more, screaming, crying, her world undone. There was no comfort I could give, no offer of protection. The blood from my shattered nose filled up my mouth as I lay on my back. I tried to rise once more, only to be battered again by an unseen force. Kip sobbed, and in that moment I knew I had failed her. The tall figure stooped in the darkness, grabbing Kip by her long locks of beautiful brown hair, and yanked her head backwards. She would not let go of me. Again, the figure pulled sharply, this time wrenching my daughter straight out of my arms and lifting her up by her hair. Suddenly, the room was bathed in a shower of shattered glass. I looked up and saw the beast which had my daughter by the hair, the creature which had set out to destroy my family. It was a man, just a man. But the thing which had burst through the window was anything but human. In the darkness, I saw them struggle. The man was powerful, no doubt, but his opponent was big and quick. It was the shape of a person, but as it moved, I could hear the loud rustling of its construction. The man let out a cry, a pitiful, begging sound, pleading for mercy. He dropped Kip to the ground. Silence. Nothing but the rustling of leaves in the night. One last gasp was heard as our attacker was dragged through the open window to his death. I don't know how long I passed out for, but it was Erin who woke me. The attacker had left her unconscious for a time, but she was okay. Helped to my feet, we both staggered over to where Kip was standing. She was leaning out of the window, crying, but they weren't tears of fear or physical pain. I knew that sound well. It was the cry of grief and loss. Looking down below, the still dead corpse of our attacker lay on the ground, covered by a blanket of leaves which slowly blew away into the distance. We hugged each other and consoled Kip as she stared out into the night.
Mr. Leaves!
She whispered.
Mr. Leaves!
When the police arrived, they quickly identified the intruder as James Grech, a man who was wanted for questioning in connection with a series of child rape accusations. He had been hiding in the old barn for a while, most probably because the house had been empty for a number of years. When he saw that a family had moved in with a young daughter, he couldn't resist the opportunity. We quickly moved from the old farmhouse to a new place across town, but even then we didn't last long. The memory of that night, being so close to where it all took place, was too much for Erin and me. But most of all, we wanted to protect our daughter. Within 6 months, we had left the town of Windarm for good. Kip is now 10 years old. She's happy and continues to surprise us day by day. She says she wants to be an explorer.
There's all sorts of stuff out there waiting to be found,
she says. After that night, I tend to agree with her. I often think about what happened and what it was that we saw, what saved us. The only hint of an explanation was given to me a month before we left Windarm. I was drinking in a local bar and started chatting to an off-duty police officer who had attended the scene the night we were attacked.
It's a shame you left the old farm. That place deserves a nice family,
he said, downing his 6th beer. How can a place deserve anything? I asked.
I suppose it's silly. I knew the previous owners, Mr. and Mrs. Demetra. Nice folks. Lived there for years. Cared for the place.
And what does that have to do with a family living there?
Well, they love kids, but they never had any of their own. Don't know why. What I do know is that everyone around here loved both of them. They always did nice things for the kids, helping out and such.
I still don't understand, I pressed.
Oh, they were always doing stuff for the kids of the town. Halloween, Christmas, whatever. And I just think, well, it would have been nice if their old farmhouse went to a family with kids, that's all.
It was then that I plucked up the courage, whether it was the alcohol or the timing, I don't know, to ask the question I needed answered most. The question I hadn't dared ask anyone for fear of looking stupid. But by then I was leaving, so it didn't matter. I just had to know. Have you ever heard of Mr. Leaves? I asked nervously. The man laughed.
Of course I have.
I was shocked. Someone knew about the house. He continued.
When Mrs. Demetra passed away, the old man was heartbroken about losing his wife. He threw himself into volunteering around the town. You know the old Windarm Park in the middle of town?
I nodded.
That was Mr. Demetra did that. Used to be all overgrown and barren, but he got the community interested in chipping in. So we all sorted it out together. The old man could move mountains. Anyway, he just worked away at fixing the park and planting trees, as well as keeping his own garden going before he passed away.
What does this have to... I said before being interrupted.
Really into gardening was Mr. Demetra. Or as the kids called him, Old Mr. Leaves.
The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore. Nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger. Hesitating then no longer, "Sir," said I, "or Madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here
I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here, I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marvel this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door. Bird or beast above the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further then he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered. Still I scarcely more than muttered. Other friends have flown before. On the morrow will he leave me, as my hopes have flown before? Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by replies so aptly spoken. Doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast, and followed faster, until his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, "Evermore." This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl, whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet violet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er. But whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer swung by seraphim, whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. "Wretch," I cried, "thy God hath lent thee. By these angels he has sent thee respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Prophet," said I, "thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Prophet," said I, "thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels named Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend," I shrieked, upstarting, "get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the padded bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore.
Thanks for listening. The story you've just heard in this channel are fan-funded. Visit chillingtalesfordarknights.com today to become a patron and help us bring radio theater back from the dead. Just click Support Us, choose an amount you're comfortable with, and become a part of our family today. Just $2 per month gets you immediate access to our patrons area. There, you'll find advanced new releases, our incredible archive of over 300 hours of productions, plus never-before-heard bonus material. Best of all, It's totally ad-free and in HD MP3 format. You get insider updates from our production team, the secret stash of streaming downloadable HD indie films, and you get to experience our patrons-only one-on-one live events, putting you up close and personal with your favorite performers, unscripted and unrehearsed. All of this and more is yours today, and all you have to do is choose your level of support. Go to chillingtalesfordarknights.com now and join us as we turn off the lights and turn on the dark.